North Korea's role in Russia's war against Ukraine appears to be moving into a new phase. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy says that Russia used ballistic missiles supplied by North Korea in an overnight attack on the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. That attack killed at least 7 people. Ukraine says between 30,000 and 50,000 additional North Korean troops could be deployed to Russia. And Ukrainian intelligence says a North Korean missile unit is now deploying to western Russia, potentially with 120 ballistic missiles and 6 launchers. Zelenskyy says that he sees all of this as clear signs that Russia is not preparing for peace, but rather for an escalation.
This is the first time in Russia's history that they no longer have a secure strategic rear. For the first time, they can't wage war without reinforcements from North Korea. They are now preparing to deploy an additional North Korean contingent on their territory. They've received, just imagine, additional ballistic missiles from North Korea.
Well, we are no longer talking simply about North Korea supplying Russia with ammunition. It appears we're now talking about soldiers, missile crews, and battlefield experience moving between two countries with nuclear weapons. Joining me now is Jenny Town. She is a senior fellow at the Stimson Center and director of its Korea program and 38 North. She joins us again from Washington. Jenny, it's good to have you back on the program. When you were with us on the 31st of July, the estimate was another 30,000 North Korean troops. Now Zelenskyy says as many as 50,000. He has not told us how Ukraine knows this. I mean, how seriously should we take that number?
I think it's really hard to assess the number itself, and 50,000 seems very high, considering the casualty rates we've seen before, given how much attention they've placed on trying to build the hero narrative, knowing that this is not a popular war to advertise inside North Korea. But certainly that cooperation is there, and more troops are being prepared to go. Exactly how many, I think, is still under debate, and we'll have to see. But some reports are estimating closer to about 20,000, or closer to what we saw before in the first deployment that the North Koreans had to Russia.
Well, does the precise number, does it even matter anymore? At what point does North Korean involvement become significant enough to change Russia's ability to sustain this war?
Well, I think that moment actually passed a while ago. North Korea and Russia have been partners in this war for a couple of years now, and that partnership has grown. The early days of providing the ammunition to allow for Russia's defense production to ramp back up into full capacity, those days are over. And instead, what you see is a lot of two-way cooperation between the two. Not only for North Korea still providing some level of material support to Russia, but a lot of military cooperation, a lot of economic cooperation, a lot of political cooperation that's going back and forth. There's also been stories about Ukraine or about Russia that's providing North Korea feedback on the initial missiles that they had sent and their performance to try and improve that quality. And I think that's what we're seeing now coming back into the country, is those improved quality missiles to be able to use, but for North Korea to also be able to use in their own field in the future.
Ukraine says that an actual North Korean missile unit is deploying to Russia, potentially with 120 ballistic missiles and 6 launchers. Does that move North Korea from being Russia's weapon supplier to maybe being a party to this war, something closer to a co-belligerent?
I think it does. I think they're still probably very cautious, that the Russians are probably still very cautious to keep North Koreans in Russian territory and not to cross over. But this is part of what was, established under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty as well, that the two signed in 2024. I don't think it's surprising to see this cooperation expand, especially given how Iran was helping provide some weaponry to Russia in the past as well, and can no longer do that. So it does really place a much greater importance on North Korea as a partner, and as one of the very few partners that Russia does have to continue and to prolong its warfighting capabilities.
President Zelenskyy, he says that North Korea is using Ukraine to learn modern warfare. And You have warned recently about exactly that: drones, artificial intelligence, electronic warfare, attacks on communications, even satellite systems. Is Ukraine becoming a live fire laboratory for how North Korea might one day fight South Korea?
Yeah, I think so. There's obviously a lot of lessons that they're learning. They haven't had battlefield experience since 1953. So this is really an important opportunity for them to find out what they don't know, and to really fill in those gaps and adapt to modern technologies, modern tactics, and especially what we see is a real emphasis on multi-domain tactics. And I think we're seeing these lessons being reinforced in the war in Iran as well. It really has a lot of implications of how differently a war in the Korean Peninsula will look in the future, and raises a lot of questions of how prepared countries like South Korea are for a new type of war, especially when it comes to their own civil defense and civilian resilience.
What is Russia teaching North Korea that Kim Jong Un could not realistically learn on his own? And what worries you the most about that?
Well, I think really just a lot of the multi-domain capabilities and seeing it in practice, how it's used, and the ability, it's not just watching the missiles and where the missiles are going, but it's really, how do you integrate cyber operations, electronic warfare, GPS jamming, communications jamming, all of these kinds of things to create a more chaotic environment that's very hard to predict. Where the center of attention is going to be, how those different elements are going to reinforce each other or create greater chaos, and the fact that right now we also don't have strong crisis communication between adversarial blocs to try and manage that kind of chaotic environment in case of a contingency on the peninsula. So I think there's a lot of really concerning developments that we're seeing here that really talk about the changing nature of warfare in general, and especially if there are multi-front conflicts going on at the same time.
Jenny Town, as always. Jenny, good to have you on the program. Good to get your valuable analysis. Thank you.